And we now begin with the Manpower panel meeting. Due to the pandemic, we will adopt the remote meeting format. And please use the background color assigned to your sector. And for the GC sector, purple. And please turn your camera to show your face. And you must be in Hong Kong to take part in this meeting. And let's start. First item, information papers issued since the last meeting. And since the last meeting, the Secretariat have issued 3 papers. The details are set on the revised agenda. First, the information paper on the implementation of the MPF system. And for the month of January and February respectively. And finally, on the third paper is also the MPF system implementation report for March. Date of next meeting and item for discussion. Let's refer to the list of outstanding items for discussion. CB bracket 2215/202201. The next meeting will be held on 2022 May 17th, Tuesday. The administration proposed to discuss the following. 1, implementation of the statutory minimum wage. 2, employment support services. And 3, manpower training and qualifications framework. For C, we'll invite the Labor Welfare Bureau and the Education Bureau to join our discussion. Do members have any views on the proposed item for discussion for the May meeting? Since we have quite a few items today, and I believe there will be a heated discussion, may I suggest that we extend the meeting for 30 minutes? And we'll end at 6:30 and start at 4:00 for the next meeting. And item 3, review of the coverage of the ex gratia payment items under the protection of wages on insolvency fund and the levy rate of business registration certificate. Since it's a legislative proposal, we invite all legislative members to take part. The Secretariat has prepared a background brief for members' reference, CB bracket 2215/2022 bracket 03. First, I'll invite the Commissioner for Labor, Mr. Chris Sun, to walk us through the administration paper. Paper number CB bracket 2215/2022 bracket 02. Then we open the floor for questions. For fair and orderly arrangement of the speaker list, I'll ask members to remove the raise hand button. After clearing the raise hand signal, the members please press the raise hand button again. Which I shall allot 4 minutes per member, Q&A included, so that the administration can have sufficient time to respond. I'll now pass on to Mr. Chris Sun, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman. As we all know that the PWIF, since its formation of 1985, after 37 years, the objective is significant and clear. Is to help the employees affected by the closure of business by their insolvent employers to provide a timely relief in form of ex gratia payment. All along, the Labor Department and the Fund Board keep in view the fund's financial health and the economic circumstances, and amended the scope and the amount from time to time. There has been 8 adjustments. The fund is mainly financed by the annual levy on the Business Registration Certificate, the BRC, and current levy rate is $250. At the end of 2022, the accumulated surplus of the fund will be over $6.2 billion. The Labor Department and the Fund Board have completed a review of the coverage of the ex gratia payment items and the rate of the BRC levy. At the meeting of the 6th of January this year, the Fund Board have considered the stable financial position, and the need to provide even better protection to employees, has reached a unanimous agreement on the following proposals. 1, raising the maximum amount of ex gratia payment payable under the fund as follows. For the arrears of wages, from $36,000 to maximum $80,000. 2, 1 month wages in lieu of notice, the WILON, from $22,500 to $45,000. 3, SP severance payment, from $50,000 plus 50% of excess entitlement to $100,000 plus 50% of any excess entitlement. And the pay for untaken annual leave or pay for untaken statutory holidays from current $10,500 to $26,000. The dual payment periods of the AW, WILON, POAL, and PUSH are maintained. And the levy rate of PRC from $250 to $150 per year. We believe that if our proposals are implemented, will bring better protection to affected employees, at the same time to reduce the burden of businesses. In the course of review, the LB has taken into account the abolition of the offsetting arrangements of the MPF to the PWIF, and factoring in the different economic scenarios and the offsetting arrangement abolition, the board deems that there is sufficient financial strength to implement our proposals. In February 2022, the government has consulted LAB on the review result and the proposal. The LAB has unanimously endorsed these proposals. We are now reporting to the Manpower panel that after consulting the members, we can introduce the amendments to the LegCo for passage. Our target is to introduce the relevant legislative amendments into LegCo in the first half to 2022 before the summer break. Thank you, Chairman. We'll now open the floor to questions. First, Mr. Lam Chen-Shing, Vice Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, the Commissioner's introduction. Let me declare that I'm still a member of the PWIF Fund Board. However, my appointment has since ended. I support these decisions, especially for the AW portion. During the pandemic, I've helped a lot of the F&B industry workers to apply for PWIF. Usually the amount was about $60,000 to $70,000 since they worked for quite a long time and have a higher income. Even if they managed to apply for PWIF, for the AW portion, the maximum is currently just $36,000, and there were a few quite an outstanding portion owed to them. And only at the very worst scenarios, 3B, even for 2 to 3 years. And now that with the sitting amount of over 6 billion of surplus, unless this recession lasts for 8 to 10 years, therefore I endorse this proposal. In 2002, there was quite a few years of Asian financial crisis. A lot of company closed and applied to the PWIF. It was running a very skinny surplus. The government injected almost $700 million, and then the fund repaid the government injection over the years. The most ideal that we can adjust the excrescence payment based on the Protection of Wages Ordinance, PWIO. If the condition worsens, that the government can deploy the last resort by way of direct injection into the PWIF. Well, that's really the last resort. If there's insufficient surplus, then the government should bail it out. The government frequently stresses that by abolishing the offsetting arrangements, there will be greater a burden on the PWIF. In the past, there has been offsetting with the remaining portion that can be reimbursed through the PWIF. After abolishing the MPF offsetting, the government will offer subsidy, and also there's dedicated saving accounts that the workers can tap into. For the companies that are about to be closed or be wound up, can they also apply for government subsidies and make use of the DSAs to meet the severance payment and long service leaves? Even abolishing the offsetting arrangements, let's say the DSA ran short, and then they can apply for PWF for the remaining portion. I don't see will be a lot of pressure on the PWIF in terms of claims. I wonder if this is the case. Since we have a stable surplus, after implementing new proposals, we can still review the upper payment limit as well as the BRC levy rate. Thank you. Chairman, I thank you for Mr. Lam's advice and question. Let's say the abolition of the offsetting and go ahead. The government outlines its subsidy proposal. So long the employers are still in business, then there will be the SP and the LSP entitlements that they can apply for subsidy for the government. There's a prerequisite though. Before obtaining the subsidy, they must pay first. Well, this is a pretty use of public money that the employer must meet the SP and LSP obligations before applying for the subsidy. This will be the arrangement. So Mr. Lam is right. Now that we're offering a 25-year subsidy, it would definitely help the employees meet the SP and LSP obligations. If the employee cannot meet their outstanding obligations and they're about to close, for the owning amount, they can apply for excrescence payment through the PWIF. Another case of the designated saving accounts, we still need to finalize some details. Our idea is that the amount in the DSA are injected by the employer to meet the future LSP arrangement. Of course, they can tap into the DSAs. Well, we have to assume the business are still running, that they can tap into the DSA amount to at least meet part of the LP and LSP obligations, LSP and SP obligations. This will help the employers, help to reduce the pressure brought to PWF due to the abolition arrangements.
Thank you, Mr. Chang Soo-tong. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner. In principle, I support the government's proposal after the review of the ex gratia payment items. And there are several adjustments. Well, for these 4 adjustments, other than the last one, which is about leave, well, that one has never changed since the implementation of the system. As for the other 3 items, I think last one, the first one was adjusted, it was in 1999. So this is quite a delay. I think now the fund is very stable and sound. And now you are proposing to make changes. Is quite late, but I'm still quite happy that the government is now making such proposals after the review. So I support such proposals. As for the other adjustments, after making the adjustments, they would cover over 90% of the applications. However, for severance payment, SP, it will be increased to $100,000 plus 50% of any excess entitlement. However, will only cover 78%, even after the adjustment. So I think this is quite conservative. Can the commissioner explain to us what considerations do you have? How about making or raising the coverage up to 90%? Would it fetch you financially? And also for the application for the fund. Now, I think it's still quite complicated. Our union has received a case. This applicant said that it will take 8 to 10 months for him to get the financial relief. And most of the time, we have to go to the labor tribunal, and it's very complicated, and it's a long procedures. So it's not really that timely a relief for the applicant. So, Commissioner, do you think such procedures can be compressed so that employees can be helped as soon as possible? Commissioner, thank you for the questions. Well, as Mr. Zhao pointed out, for all these ex gratia payment items, after making adjustments, the coverage would go up to 90%. However, for SP, even after the adjustment, the coverage is 89%. There are reasons for this. You may understand this. Now, with the abolition of the offsetting arrangements under the MPF system, the financial implications for the fund will be increased. We can only estimate what the increase will be. So we have to consider the future condition of the fund. That's why we have to strike a balance. Now, for these changes, well, in the past, for severance pay is up to $50,000 in the past, and now it's raised to $100,000. So for workers that do not have a very high pay, this is very helpful. But for the excess entitlement is still maintained at 50%. Now we have to strike a balance because we know there may be financial changes for the fund. We have made a lot of calculations, but all these are based on projections. Though we understand that the projections may not be too far from the actual situation. However, they are still projections. So that's why we want to play safe and we want to leave a certain room. But still, this now it is still up to 80%. So for SP, the adjustment is a bit lower than the other items. And point number 2, I understand that many members of the labor section hopes that we can increase the whole progress, but there are a lot of things that we have to take into consideration. Now, if there are statutory requirements, we have to comply with all of them. And secondly, we do not want the fund to be abused. So we have to be careful, and we have to strike a balance. We want to help the employees as much as possible, but we have to bear all this in mind. I would like to talk to you. So with these two prerequisites, what can we do? Well, you know that if you make an application, if you can provide us with all the information and documents, then the process will be quite fast. So for the fund, after the ex gratia payment items are increased, we hope that we can sit down with members of the labor sector and try to find out better ways. We want to comply with the law, and we also want the relevant processes to be compressed. I'm sure with your wisdom and experiences, we will surely find ways. But the most urgent thing now is to make the adjustment first so that employees can benefit. As for the procedures, we can sit down and talk about them together. The Labor Department is willing to talk to you about how to compress the application procedures. Okay, next, Mr. Chang Kwok-kwan. Thank you, Chairman. Now for the ex gratia payment items under the fund, actually there have not been adjustments since 1996. In 2012, one adjustment was made. That is, the coverage would be extended to pay for untaken annual leave and pay for untaken statutory holidays. Now for these new proposals, they will benefit both the employers and employees because employees will be better protected. And we also see that in February, the Labor Advisory Board had a meeting and agreed to all these proposals. I'm sure the employers and employees will both support these proposals. However, I still have several questions. For the last major adjustment concerning the ex gratia payment ceilings, it was before the handover in 1996, a quarter century ago. And for deciding on such ceilings, we have to look at the median monthly earnings of the general household survey. We understand that people's earnings have been increasing. So would the government consider this? There should be a regular or long-term review system so that we do not have to wait for another 25 years to conduct another review. We understand that a lot of companies have been facing a lot of difficulties in the past few months, and you are going to amend the relevant laws soon. So after the fifth wave of epidemic, I think many workers have been affected. So will you also take that into consideration when you amend the law? Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Well, in the future, will there be a regular review mechanism? Well, for this review, yes, it's quite far away from the last review. But a number of things happened in between. For example, there were judicial review cases, and there were a lot of discussions concerning the abolition of offsetting arrangements under the MPF system, because that involves a lot of things. It involves lengthy discussions, whether the offsetting arrangement should be abolished and when will it be done, etc. So that's why the whole review interval has been lengthened. So after this review, well, actually the fund was continue to monitor the labor situation all the time. For example, whether the median monthly earnings has changed, etc. So I think we don't have to wait for another period as long as this one for another review, because this is also the responsibility of the fund board. That is, it will have to look at the ex gratia payment levels and whether they should be changed, etc. Thank you for your views. And secondly, About the commencement date, we hope that before the summer break, we can submit a resolution. Now, with the resolution, we can amend the ex gratia payment levels. And with the approval of the LegCo, we will gazette the amendments, and then, but then we will not be going back when it comes to the applications. We hope that things can be implemented as soon as possible. So there is no retrospective arrangements. We hope that in early July, the resolution can be passed and implemented. If that is the case, it would help a lot of employees, and timely financial relief can be provided to them as soon as possible. Now, for the ex gratia payment levels changes, I think it will benefit both the employers and employees. I hope that the legislative procedures can be fast, and after today's consultation, you can amend the relevant law as soon as possible. And I hope that the employees can be helped as early as possible. Now, just now, Mr. Chang Guoguan has asked similar questions. Now, for the last adjustments, it was done 25 years ago in 1996. It's almost like a generation's time. So I would like to ask the government, can it conduct a review in every 5 years? Maybe that can be a tacit consensus. Well, if it's written down in the law, then it would even be better. But at least there should be a tacit agreement that is the ex gratia payment levels can be reviewed every 5 years. Otherwise, employees would find the ex gratia payments not that helpful. And thirdly, I have a technical opinion. In the past, we have handled a lot of cases. And it seems that when it comes to the legal procedures, the whole process would be quite slow. And sometimes when they start the procedure will take about 9 months or even up to 2 years. So would the government consider this? If the employer is willing to sign a statement stating that he's insolvent, then can the Labor Department start the application for the fund immediately? Then workers or employees can be helped as soon as possible. Thank you, Chairman. Point number one, as Mr. Zhang said just now, and the chairman also thinks so, that is, for this review, yes, it's indeed very far away from the last review. The fund board is actually very proactive. Now, if factors have changed, for example, median monthly earnings have changed significantly, or there are new factors occurring, then work should be done as soon as possible. We can't clearly say that as to when a review will be conducted, but we can assure you that it won't take such a long time next time. So after several years, we will look at the situation, try to find out whether a review should be conducted. So we will do this regularly, and I'm sure the fund board will be doing this. Well, many members of the fund board are from labor unions, so I'm sure they will be monitoring the situation very closely. So we will try our best to shorten the time gap between two reviews. And of course, the chairman is an expert in this area. He asked whether the whole process can be compressed. We are willing to explore that. Well, there may not be only one solution. Well, there are legal requirements. Of course, we have to comply with them. And secondly, we cannot design a procedure which is easily abused. We want the money to be spent wisely. We want the money to be spent on employees. So there are a lot of ways to do that. And we also hope that the whole process can be compressed. So in the coming few months, we will focus our efforts on the legislation concerning these adjustments. And after the amendments, we will start our second part of the work. That is, we will sit down with the labor sector. We hope that they can share their views with us. We will try to find out how to do things in the best way. And we also do not want the fund to be abused. As for administrative procedures, the improvements does not need legislating.
Next, Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to follow up on the review. 25 years is quite a long time. I agree with Mr. Horace Chang and the Chairman. And I heard from Commissioner Sun that whether we can compress the processing timeline. I heard a conservative answer. I would like to find out about the details. I don't know for each round of review, how long did it take? Let's say the review will require a lot of manpower and resources. Maybe it's hard to do an annual review. However, well, with the new culture in LegCo, we have a lot of division of labor. For example, reaching consensus in the LAB between the labor and employee groups. Let's say you can brief the LAB on the status of the fund. If we see there's a need of a review, you can start the process instead of coming back to LegCo to consult the members. Well, of course, the labor representatives are important. However, not all the members understand it. I hope that you can make better use of LAB or even do some external consultations with all the stakeholders well, to do more communication outside of LegCo. I heard from Commissioner Sun in response to some members mentioned that you have to reduce or prevent abuse. Well, we all were workers at some point. And I've noticed some unscrupulous employees. I believe that most of them are decent, with a few bad apples. When these 6 months of the business day, start thinking of how to close their business and abuse their PWIF. Can the commissioner tell us what kind of abuse have you witnessed? Well, the payment from PWIF is the last resort. If they're doing well, they don't need to go insolvent or wind up. If the funds have been embezzled by the company, you can reduce the reliance on PWIF. What can the Labor Department do to chase back the money embezzled by the company? Or let's say they embezzle the amount and wind up the company, and the directors can start another company again. I wonder if the commissioner has any insight for the public. Thank you, Mr. Ho. Like Mr. Ho said, we'll make better use of the LAB. The LAB is very concerned about this. Well, with your reminder, that we probably will make better use of consult the LAB for any future reviews to narrow the gap between both sides for a more timely review. And second question is about abuse. I'll let Mr. Lee to talk about the abuse. Well, the money abuse will not get to the workers who need it. On one hand, make sure there's prudent use of public money, and also make sure it gets into the right hands. Thank you, Mr. Lee. To deter abuse, the Labor Department have been proactively preventing such from occurring. Besides the Labor Department, We have stepped up the investigations of suspected cases. We set up a interdepartmental task force to include a LD and the Commercial Crime Bureau and the Legal Aid Department. Through this task force, if we come across any suspected irregularities, maybe there's illegal transfer of asset or embezzlement, or using deceptive means to escape obligations or fail to keep the books properly, we will follow it and refer to the right department to follow up and conduct law enforcement. Since the formation of the task force, we have conducted quite a few law enforcement operations. For the breaching employees and the company directors, we have initiated prosecutions. This will serve as a deterrent so that the employer will not dare to break the law or use illegal means to escape the obligation and transfer their liabilities to the PWIF. We will continue to work at it and strengthen our enforcement effort. Can the department provide some figures on the prosecutions and the processing time? Do you have any information at hand, or you can furnish after the meeting? For the number of prosecutions, since the formation of the task force for the commercial crimes related, we have prosecuted 5 employees, 5 company directors or PIC, or for the deceptive practices or abuse of PWIF with staff participation, and 19 staff were convicted. These are about a deception and abuse situations. And in the task force, also the rep from the official receiver. So some of the cases involving directors with account indiscrepancies. For the 101 involving company directors' eligibility, they have been disqualify them from running a company or serving as directors. Next, Mr. Wang Kwok. And thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, my question is covered by other members. I welcome the government's proposal to adjust the upper limit of the ex gratia payment of the PWIF. Well, this is the adjustment after more than 2 decades. And a lot of the workers were forced to settle for 20 or 30% discount. And in 2019, the outstanding wages is about $51,000. And at the end, they only get $36,000, which is a 30% hair shave. We support this amendment. This is long overdue. These are the workers' entitlements that rightfully belong to them. That should we have a regular review, that now that we have a problem of only making adjustment after waiting for so many years, we should set up a clear standard of this standard median wage times 4. On streamlining procedures, the commissioner said after passing the amendments, there's something that we can discuss. I agree with Mr. Michaeluk said. The ex gratia payment, just like the assistant commissioner said, that there are only 19 employees convicted of abusing PWIF, a rather low proportion of the total number of payees. let's say you can make sure that they can get the full employee entitlements. We shouldn't, just because of a few bad apples, that jeopardize the timely and full statutory entitlements of the employees. Thank you, Mr. Wang's question and advice. Well, quite a few members have said, for any future review of the PTBIF, well, it would be a much shorter to wait. If there are any changes to any of the factors, we will look into it. We'll see that we will need to shorten the duration after passing the amendments, and we will take it to the LAB, then to let go. I believe that for the PTBIF will be more up to date, as we all care that if any problems, the workers can use the PTBIF as the safety net of last resort. Mr. Wang mentioned about a specific approaches. So while meeting the legal requirements, but would not let you abuse it, whether some kind of procedures can be streamlined, is something we're willing to look into. And coming up, we hope to focus our efforts on raising the ceiling of the ex gratia payment first. After completing this, then we shall immediately jump to the discussion. What is all about administrative arrangements? I believe that we can pull our minds together, and while understanding the mutual concerns, there must be a way that we can expedite the whole process. Thank you, Chairman and Mr. Wang. Next, Mr. Kwok Wai Kang. Thank you, Chairman. Going through the paper, and we all support the proposals. Since this adjustment is quite substantial, I must stress though, why is this adjustment so substantial? Just because it's been 25 years since the last adjustment. Back in 1996, the median in monthly earnings was just $9,500. And the MME this year is already 20,000, which is more than double. That's why we need such a major revision. My colleagues were asking, can the government do a periodic review instead of 25 years? And we heard from the commissioner that you are willing to consider. Well, can we be more pragmatic? Can you tell us when we'll discuss the regular review at the PWIF board meeting? Well, would that be depends on the LD, or can the board can discuss that? Okay, we have a timetable. Instead of leaving us to wait indefinitely or give us some ambiguous answers. Commissioner, thank you, Mr. Kwok's question. We understand that members are very concerned about, upon the passage of these amendments, when the external factors such as the changes to the median monthly earnings, to whether PWIF can catch up. Our view is that if we need to stipulate a fixed period for review, this may not be the best. However, we agree that while the fund board is also concerned that whether we can have a better way instead of waiting too long for the next review. Well, this does not involve legislative amendments. This is one of the duty of the fund board, is monitoring the fund operations. The objective is to provide a safety net. We find this safety net need to be expanded, or the amount is not high enough, then it should be adjusted. How about this? Let me think about it, or let us think about it, so that I could have a more assuring approach. If there are any changes to the external factors, that the fund board can propose, review, and offer adjustments.
Yes, the commissioner has given us an open-ended answer, but he's still willing to think about it. Now, if he doesn't want a fixed time frame, how about a range like 3 to 5 years or 5 to 8 years? I can give you certain flexibility, and it won't be across the board. How about that? But you must make such an arrangement. Commissioner? Thank you, Mr. Kwok. Yes, we'll go back and think about it. Well, to address your concern, we will make sure that the future reviews are timely and it would react faster to changes in external factors. So we'll go back and think about it, and we will try to let people have a better understanding of the operation of the fund, and it can respond to the needs of the employees as fast as possible. We want the operation to be smooth. We don't want things to be so mechanical and under a lot of restrictions. Okay, I can make a summary here. I would like to remind members that now we are adjusting the gratia payment ceilings. It involves legislative amendments. So we will do this by a resolution, and this will be a negative vetting. If members think that there should be more detailed discussions at a House committee meeting, you can propose forming a bills committee. Let's move on to the next item. The next item is item number 4, creation of 1 additional supernumerary post of Chief Labor Officer D1 in the Labor Department to head the Registry of Trade Unions. Well, this is about manpower arrangements, and we have invited other electrical members to attend this meeting. Now, we have Mr. Ho Kai Ming, Under Secretary for Labor and Welfare, with us to take us through the paper. The paper number is CB 2215/2022/04. Now let's wait for the relevant government officials to go online. Other than Mr. Ho Kai Ming, the Undersecretary, we also have Mr. Chris Sun, Commissioner of Labor, Mr. Raymond Ho, Deputy Commissioner for Labor Administration. Mr. Ho Kai Ming, please. Thank you, Chairman. Today is the 19th of April, and on the 15th of April, we had the National Security Education Day. Now, we are proposing to create this post. This is related to that day. Now, we are proposing to create 1 additional numerary post of Chief Labor Officer CLOD1, and he will lead the Registry of Trade Unions. It will last for 3 years, and he will strengthen the guidance, supervision, and regulation over trade unions. RTU administers the trade unions ordinance with a view to fostering sound trade union management and trade unionism. Now, after the Black Clad riots, there have been a lot of changes. We have received over 4,000 applications for setting up trade unions from November 2019 to March 2022. Before that, RTU only received about 15 applicants each year. As at end of March 2022, the number of applications pending registration stood at 1,519. The RTU is very concerned about the activities of some trade unions. For example, the Language Therapist Union, it made use of cartoons to incite children to hate the government. So they, the officials were accused of certain offenses under the NSL. The NSL has been promulgated, and now we are very concerned about the activities of trade unions. So the RTU will be carrying out works in different areas to make sure that its surveillance over the trade unions will be more stringent, and the Registrar of Trade Unions will prohibit persons who have been convicted of offenses on endangering national safety or national security from becoming officials of trade unions. It will ensure that the trade unions will only carry out activities that are consistent with the TUO, and it will assume new statutory duties, including surveilling, gathering intelligence, proactively conducting statutory inspections, requiring trade unions to submit information and responses on activities that are suspected to be inconsistent with TUO and the Constitution's enhancing regulation of the dissolution process of trade unions, and also devise and implement educational and promotional programs to enhance the understanding of trade unions, officials, and staff on NSL. The RTU in the past had been an independent unit. There was the head at that time, and after combining with the Labor Department, the post has been taken up by a CLO, D1. In 2019 April, the CLO statutory minimum wage also took up the duties of heading the RTU, but at that time it only took up part of her jobs. But after the riots, the relevant works have become more complicated and the workload has increased. So the CLO SMW can no longer take up such duties. Well, last Friday was National Security Education Day, so we have to be very careful about activities that would endanger the national safety and security here. So we need a dedicated CLO to take up such jobs, and the duration will be 3 years. We hope members would note our proposal and comment on our proposal. Subject to members' views, we will seek approval from the Financial Committee or LATU in accordance with the established mechanism. Well, for members who are interested in asking questions, please press the raise hands buttons. So we have Mr. Wong Kwok, Lim Chen Sing, MNU, Zhou Xiuchong, Koi Kang, and Liang Chi-wing, who have raised their hands. First, Mr. Wong Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. And Undersecretary as well as Commissioner. From the paper, we know that in the past period of time, well, I can say that, well, before 2019, things have been running smoothly. But after 2019, we have seen people setting up false trade unions, and many of them try to incite people to fight against the government, or they promote Hong Kong's independence, or they even want to affect the ruling of the chief executive. And over 4,000 applications for forming trade unions have been received within a short period of time. We understand that they have ill intentions, but we think the LTU hasn't done a really good job. And some members, some people who were promoting the fight against the government were even allowed to take part in the election of the LAB. So we hope that the government in the future would shoulder the responsibility of protecting the national security. So in the future, how can the trade unions ordinance be amended as soon as possible so that this loophole can be plugged? And there are some trade unions that disguise as ordinary trade unions, but they have other agendas. So we have to be very careful about them. So what do we do about such fake trade unions? And there are still 1,000 of them waiting for their applications to be processed. So what would be done? I hope that the TU can really shoulder the responsibility of ensuring national security. and the relevant TUO should be enforced stringently. We cannot allow such fixed trade unions to be messing around. Then we can purify the ecosystem of the trade unions. And for those who really want to run trade unions for their members, they can do their job. Yes, for Mr. Wong's concern, they are exactly the concerns of the Labor Department. So after establishing such a post, the COO will be working in 3 major areas. Well, under the present law, now the relevant COO cannot do certain things, so we have to amend the TUO. And in the past, he may not have been authorized to do something. So now we have new duties. So we will have to carry them out. For example, he would have to do surveilling, and he would have to gather intelligence proactively, and also he would enhance the regulation of the dissolution process of trade unions. We respect Hong Kong people's rights to form societies under the basic law. However, we still need a person to lead the LTU to implement our policies carefully. Next, Mr. Lam Chen Sing, the Vice Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 questions and several concerns. Last week, we had the National Security Education Day. The government has made a lot of publicities, and we are sure that the trade unions should comply with the NSL. We totally support that. I'm concerned about the efficiency of the CLO. Well, for NSA, it's not targeting trade unions or companies, NGOs, or societies registered under societies ordinance. They have to comply with the NSL. Just now, the case concerning the language, the Labor Union of Hong Kong speech therapists was mentioned. So for RTU, I'm not sure. Is it really too busy to look into these issues? And it is also said that it will be doing more in the area of publicity and education. I also support that. But now there are also other departments doing publicity and education. So when it comes to efficiency, do we need the RTU to do such work? I agree that manpower should be enhanced because now there are many more new trade unions and the application queue is long. And each trade union may have to hand in information concerning the financial status or members. So with so many new trade unions, I think that we need to enhance the frontline manpower. But do we really need a COO to do all this work? I hope that the administration can give me more explanation. And after creating such a post, how can you ensure that the trade unions will comply with the NSL? And for Article 27 of the Basic Law, it states that Hong Kong people have the right to form trade unions, to go on strike, etc. And under the TUO, it is said that trade unions can be exempted from prosecutions if they conduct certain activities for their members. And looking at the history of Hong Kong, we have different trade unions. Some trade unions are pro-Taiwan and they would celebrate different festivals. For example, the Hong Kong Federation of Trade Unions in the past, we also had trade unions under us that are also members of the CTU. So how can you ensure that trade unions would comply with the NSL, and at the same time, you can ensure workers' rights to participate in trade unions? As for efficiency and other questions, maybe the commissioner can answer those questions. Well, for efficiency, I've heard members on many occasions, we agree that efficiency should be enhanced, but it's not just about KPI. Now we also talk about OPL. That is, we have to achieve certain objectives. Mr. Taming Kang also made a speech saying that we have to make sure that there will be no more activities endangering our national security. So we have to look at NSL as well as the TUO, and we have to consider different situations. Trade unions can be set up, but there are certain rules they have to abide by.
Thank you, Mr. Lam's question. We all understand what Mr. Lam is referring to. The operation of trade unions is governed by two ordinances. First will be the freedom to associate. Basically, Article 27 allows Hong Kong people the right to associate. And second piece of legislation is the national security education. They are equally important and not conflicting with each other. So long as you are abiding the law, you are free to form associations. That's loud and clear and free of ambiguity. From about 800 unions within a few years' time, it mushroomed into over 1,500. Whether some of these are not really trade unions. So these are what we try to tackle. Due to the characteristic of the trade unions, like Mr. Lam said, is they are protected by the freedom to form associations. So these are all very challenging tasks. Not only require manpower, well, let's be direct. We need to put a lot of thought into it. Not only we need to ensure the freedom of association is protected, if we identify that some of the operations are in breach of the UTO, is not really performing like a trade union. We can't just accuse of being breaching the law. We need to look for the evidence. We need to follow the TUO to do correspondences work. So there's more than registering trade unions as handled by the front line. It's not about the numbers, but the difficulty. And also we need to protect their rights. That's why we need to have a dedicated directorate position for 3 years. We're facing the problem, not just about more or less people, rather we need to follow the due process. The NSL Article 9 and 10 has a clear obligation on the government departments to strengthen national security. To manage trade unions, we need to identify shortcomings of manpower and resources and fill in the gaps accordingly. In terms of national security, there's no room for compromise. We need to be at the forefront. After review, we have identified some shortcomings in terms of manpower and resource. That's why we're proposing to create this position of Chief Labor Officer. That's why we're offering on just 3 years. After we build the foundation, then we'll take a look by then. If everything is fixed and on the right track, then we will abolish the position. That's something we hope to share with all the members, why we need to create this dedicated supernumerary position of 3 years. Thank you. Next, Mr. Yan Menu. Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 inquiries. Well, I had a similar question like Mr. Lam Chen Xing. By creating this position of Chief Labor Officer, this position really handles the trade unions application log jams, or we need more frontline workers, a few pair of hands to vet these applications? I hope that the department can explain. This Chief Labor Officer post, what benefit does it bring? This is quite important. Oh, we also add non-direct positions to speed up the processing. Just now, Mr. Wang Kwok mentioned during the 2019 Black Flag riots, there were a lot of the trade unions registered after the promulgation of the NSL and after improving our electoral system, that the government stated, introduced a rule that the trade union must register for at least 2 years. However, the TUO has not been amended for a long time. I wonder if the TUO will be amended and what will be the directions, and whether this is linked to the creation of the post of the CLO. Chairman, in terms of manpower, I let the commissioner to chip in. Just now, Mr. Gans asked, that's why we need to create this position. I wonder if you've been subjected to the RTU inquiries. First, they will inspect the constitution and the books. And each time I need to spend a whole afternoon with the RTU to explain any discrepancy with the books and what need to be accounted for. Well, it was 10 years ago. After 2019, well, the decisions are a lot more complicated. Now that we have the new piece of legislation, HKNSL, which empower our frontline, and a lot of these illegal activities must be disguised with legal purposes. Our new enforcement strategy, for example, proactive evidence gathering and inspections, require a more experienced and a senior colleague to lead a team to carry this new line of work. That's why we come to the Manpower panel to seek your blessing before applying to the ASC and so on. I'll see if the commissioner can supplement. Thank you, Mr. Yan. Let me talk about the establishment first. Currently, for the Registrar of Trade Unions, for the civil servants positions 19, not a big department. Since 2019, we have a huge spike of applications. We have done two things. Besides the 19 civil service positions, we hired 28 NCSC staff to handle this huge amount of applications. So these are the frontline workers. Besides this, within the LW Labor Department, even though the other divisions are short on manpower, we've also deployed some manpower, and this was not included into the establishment. Well, since that the registrar having huge problems with redeploying manpower, at least to keep up with the processing load. Mr. N also asked whether this proposed new position will handle the proposed TUO amendments. He has a lot on his plate. For this proposed amendments, the eventual goal is to implement the NSL provisions. Not only does he or she have to identify the room for amendments, and also need to assess the impact after amendments, whether there are any benefits, and also address any current challenges. The legal amendment requires senior officials at the policy level to lend their advice. So one of the key tasks will be amending the TOO. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chao Siu Chung. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioner and Undersecretary. In principle, I support adding more manpower to Labor Department as a whole, especially for the Registrar of Trade Unions. Well, in my 8-year tenure in the Labor Advisory Board, I understand the LD department's heavy workload. The Registrar of the Trade Union is responsible for the supervision of the trade union's operations. Well, there hadn't been a lot of active trade unions all along. All of a sudden, there are about 1,500 trade unions. In not too distant future, there will be over 2,000. I see it's reasonable to double its establishment. And gotta raise two concerns. Well, I suppose they've been covered by my colleagues. The Hong Kong trade unions are tight on budget. If the LD will be acting too strong on its regulation, it may be difficult for trade unions to cooperate with the registrar due to the resource shortage. I support the registrar to work along the lines of the NSL. However, should this really be handled by the LD? I wonder if this what is being said in the NSL. For investigation and intelligence gathering, the police has a dedicated department. Why should it be picked up by the Labor Department? Well, the Chief Labor Officer or the Registrar of Trade Unions has been taken up by the CLO of statutory minimum wage. Now that you decided you cannot, you need to split their positions. I wonder if we can abolish the CLO for the statutory minimum wage. I'm not targeting a particular officer. Well, is this person redundant? Well, if it does not to act as the registrar, will this position become redundant? Can we work it through internal redundant instead of creating this new CLO post? I wonder if this task can be absorbed by creating the post of senior labor officer. For the manpower deployment, I will let the LD to explain. Mr. Chow is a veteran trade unionist. Well, in my dealings with the RT, I suppose well experienced that whether we will besides what is required of the NSL, I suppose we need a step further. It's not just a police responsibility. All the departments should need to fulfill the requirement of the NSL. I see it is necessary. I'll see if the commissioner would like to supplement. Thank you, Mr. Chow. On your first question, let me share something with you. In the future, well, due to the spike in the number of trade unions, according to Article 9 of the NSL, we have a duty to supervise and regulate the trade unions. Our attitude will be risk-based. For the law-abiding and legit trade unions, that some of the unions don't have a lot of members. In Hong Kong, 7 people can form trade unions. Well, we encourage people to form trade unions if they see fit, as protected by the basic law. I don't want to put the pressure on the unions. Well, more requirements mean higher costs for them. We know that some of the trade unions don't seem to be acting like labor unions. By taking the risk-based approach, how do we gather intelligence, investigate? That means we need a mastermind or brain behind it. In this case, a CLO. Once the design, all the system and check and balance in place, it will be a smooth sail afterwards. We're talking about invoking the TUO. For quite some time, it has been rather administrative. We're just asking for information instead of doing so many other things. However, we would not ask for the same information from all the trade unions.
Through internal deployments, whenever we create a new post, we would first try to find out whether we can have internal deployments. Yes, we all have different views on statutory minimum wage. However, SMW involves a lot of work, and in the near future, the CLO SMW would have a lot of work to do. So we really have to wait very carefully. Now, if we force an officer to take up both jobs, that is SMW and trade unions, it will be a huge burden on the post holder. And for we do not have many CLOs. Well, if the CLO SMW doesn't have to do work for trade unions, then he's quite free. No, actually, he's very busy. Well, originally he was responsible for 2 duties, but now only 1 duty is left. So he would have much less work. As for SMW, yes, we all think that more work should be done. However, the government has been refusing to review SMW once every year. If you do that, I would agree that the CLO SMW will have a lot of work to do. And now the CLO SMW doesn't have to do work in the area of trade unions, and he will be quite free. I'm not targeting any particular person. I'm just talking about this post holder. Well, when I made my speech just now, I already said this. Well, in the early years, the RTU's tasks were very easy. So at that time, the work under the RTU were under different units. And now our CLO SMW is taking up 2 duties. His major responsibility is for SMW. And because in the past, the workload for RTU was not that heavy. However, after 2019, things have changed. We don't think he can shoulder the burden anymore. So that's why we are proposing to create this post. So originally the 2 duties were not really the same. One was heavier and the other was lighter. Mr. Poika. Thank you, Chairman. Many members have asked questions, and lots of people ask how busy would the CLO SMW be, because now you only conduct a review every 2 years. You don't do it every year. So why would you say that he's very busy? And last week we had a National Security Education Day. We educated people to learn more about national security, and we must all be prepared. Though we are in a peaceful time, we still have to be prepared. So, but does it mean that you really have to create this post? If that is the case, then all licensing units would have to increase their manpower, because organizations may be formed for other purposes other than they stated. So all the licensing authorities would have to increase their manpower. And when I look at the figures the government gave us in the past 2 years, the number of trade unions has increased by 600 and now is over 1,500, and the applications pending registration is 1,519, and you have processed the applications of over 2,000. So how many of these applications have been turned down, and how many of these applications have been withdrawn? So please give me such figures so that I will understand how busy you are. And for the STU's tasks, one thing is very important, that is gatekeeping. When a trade union is formed, you have to know very well what it's doing. Now, for national security, you have to do much more work. Is it because your gatekeeping isn't done well? That is, after a trade union is formed, is doing things that is not consistent with its constitution. Now, you have cited the example of General Union of Hong Kong Speech Therapists. Are there other examples that can reflect the importance of this post? Well, you just cited one example which has been handled by the National Security Bureau already. We want more examples. Well, for gatekeeping, of course, that is a very important task of the LTU. But please look at Article 9 of NSL. The Hong Kong government has the responsibility to devise and implement educational and promotional programs to promote national security and NSL. So how can the Labor Department disseminate this message among laborers? I think we need to work more. Originally, we only had 4 persons in this unit. Now we only have a dozen. We do not have enough manpower. That's why we need a dedicated leader to lead the work of this unit. Well, this is called a registry of trade unions, but it's not just about registry. We would regularly guide, supervise, and regulate trade unions. Maybe the commissioner can share with us some figures. As for figures, maybe I can ask Mr. Raymond Ho, our deputy commissioner, to give you some information. As for Article 9 of the NSL, yes, it states that each bureau and department has this responsibility to safeguard national security. So each department would have to look at its own situation and see how it can work. For some other departments may be facing different situations. They may not need to add manpower. Now, if we can use our present resources to cope with this issue, we wouldn't propose to create this additional post. Well, but the requirement for us under the NSL is very clear. So we want to do the job, and we hope the job can be well done. And for the registration of trade unions, it is not an easy task. Well, we have to make sure that Article 27 of the Basic Law is honored. We have to abide by the Basic Law completely. However, under the NSL, we also have certain responsibilities. Well, we don't just look at figures, that is how many trade unions have been registered, etc. One case can be very complicated. Well, I cannot tell you what cases we have looked into. Of course, we have been proactively inspecting different trade unions, whether they are old and new. Now, if a trade union really operates properly, if it functions properly as a trade union, then there's no problem. But we think that some other trade unions are not working as trade unions, then we have the responsibility to look at it. And this has to be done in a timely manner. If it's delayed, there may be security risk. So we have an unshakable responsibility. Mr. Raymond Holm, our Deputy Commissioner, may supplement. Mr. Kwok has asked about some figures, and some applications have been withdrawn. So do we have a breakdown of the application figures? If not, we can provide the figures after the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Kwok. Well, for handling the applications of new trade unions, the LTU would handle such applications in batches. We act on a first come, first served basis. So we look at each and every case. Well, we will liaise with the organizer and we will ask for information, for example, information concerning employment, their constitutions, etc. So when we follow up on each and every case, the applicants, well, in the course of doing our checking, the applicants may want to withdraw his application, or he may not be able to provide certain information. This also accounts for quite a big portion of the applications. Just now, the Undersecretary mentioned the case concerning the speech therapists. Well, this is about a sub judice case, so I'm not going to the details concerning it. But for trade unions like this, we would have to check all the activities they have organized. Well, for example, for the speech therapists, we don't just look at the 2 or 3 publications. We have to look at the things that they have done since the establishment, what activities they have carried out. These activities in line with the constitution of the society. So this involves a lot of work. As the Undersecretary and the Commissioner said, now the work of LTU is changing. Now it has much a heavier workload and its work is more complicated. In the future, we also have new statutory duties under the NSL. So we need a high-level official, a D1 officer to lead the LTU, because the LTU will be facing a lot of workload and challenges. Chairman, he hasn't answered my questions. They have handled 2,900 cases and there are 900 new trade unions. So 2,300 applications have failed. I ask you how many of these applications that you have declined. Maybe after Mr. Leung Chee-wing asks his questions, we will ask the Undersecretary to supplement. I hope members can be succinct. Please finish your Q&A in 4 or 5 minutes. Mr. Leung Chee-wing. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask the Undersecretary and the Commissioner. Since 2019 until now, the LTU has received 4,427 applications, and up to March this year, 1,519 applications have been successful. And so about 300 cases or applications are still pending. So when the government vets such applications in the future, will you set a time limit for yourself or for themselves, for these applicants? For example, they have to provide information within 1 or 3 months. If they cannot provide the relevant information before the deadline, then can you cancel the application? If they want to register, they can reapply. Then you can make things smoother and you won't have such a huge backlog. It's impossible for you to wait for their responses and information submission forever. Now, after the creation of this post, how much more efficient will RTU be? Well, the commissioner said that the application was like a tsunami. I think it's even like a nuclear explosion. Now, many of these applications are politically driven. And these applications were related to electoral elections. So in the future, would you ask them to take an oath so that such a politically driven trade unions cannot be formed? Trade unions should be set up for employees and workers. They should be working for the benefits only. So would you ask the applicants to take an oath before they apply?
For some requirements, I need to align with other departments. For example, the freedom of association. It's not all just trade unions, there are also other societies and so on. Whether the registration requirement should include oath checking is something we need to look with other departments. How should we follow the TUO? For example, whether the organizers have broken the law. Well, currently is a list of offenses that prevent the organizer from becoming trade union directors. Whether we will amend the law, I hope that this new office holder will look into this when proposing amendments to the TUO. For example, if it break the NSL, that whether it will be the suitable, fit and proper person to serve as the trade union and leaders. So we will be listening when we conduct a stakeholder consultations. Thank you, Mr. Leung. Mr. Leung raised some very specific proposals. For example, whether the applicants should have a deadline to submit all the information or other gatekeeping requirements. Any requirements must be done in accordance with the law. If that's stated in the law, of course, we can invoke it. If it's not required by the law, we can request it before the amendment. I understand what Mr. Leung mean by currently there are still about 1,500 trade unions applications. When this new CLO assumed office, we need to try to clear this backlog of 1,500 applications. So that this application's workload can get back to normal. Well, there's still new trade unions getting formed. However, they'll be at the back of the queue. Well, for this new legit unions, they shouldn't be obstructed by those in front of them. By creating this CLO post beside the legislative amendment, he or she need to come up with some ways to handle the logjam. It's not just about adding more stuff. It will need to amend the legislation, so be it. It can do some administrative measures. We try. Thirdly, like Mr. Leung tried. Well, we need to do a better job gatekeeping so that we can filter out this non-bona fide trade unionists. If it doesn't look like they want to be trade unions, we need to filter them out. That's why we need to CLO post who take care of everything. Right now, we're just putting out fires. We just sit down to come up with a master plan. We are too busy putting out the fires. That's why we created supernumerary a 3-year post dedicated officer. Well, I understand that the ideas you put forth, so these are the things that we will consider. Like the chairman said, of the 2,000 applications, I do not have the breakdown figures. Most of them withdrew the applications. They won't explain it, just withdraw the applications. The Labor Department regularly issued letters to see if they're going ahead with the applications. Well, some of them will tell us they will withdraw, how some of them haven't read back to us. For a more detailed breakdown, we can provide it to this secretary out of this over 2,000 withdrawals. Thank you, Mr. Lang, and thank you, Chairman. Second round, Mr. Wang Kwok. Due to time constraint, and please be concise about, just keep it under 2 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Under Secretary and Commissioner, like the Commissioner said, we will need to amend the trade unions ordinance and ensure that in compliance with the NSL. We need Manpower to amend the TUO and what a policy and strategy in line with the NSL. In terms of manpower deployment, half of the current manpower is handling the minimum wage and the other half to handle the trade unions. The claim that you need someone to draft the new policies for the execution, I suppose we have enough frontline officers. So you sure that this 3-year position can address all of the tasks mentioned? I wonder if we would consider, as let's say, that should the current CLO in charge of the statutory minimum wage should also undertake review as well, without wearing the head of the registrar. Just one person to follow minimum wage is not enough. The next time we want to review the minimum wage and you claim that you need to create another chief labor officer position. I suppose that then CLO, the SMW, we need to take on additional tasks to make the workload more even. The statutory minimum wage is a policy initiative. In our opening remarks, we stated the colleague is chiefly responsible for the minimum wage. The registrar trade unions is just an extra hat. If we decide to split the position, and what will be the duties of the CLO? Well, we need to take review, while the NSL applications will be handled by another officer. There could be some misunderstanding. In the past, the registrar didn't have much to do. It's just a matter of prudent use of resources. That's why that we have multiple titles for the same CLO. Well, it's all subject to the overall review. Well, will this post become permanent after 3 years? Well, the supernumerary positions usually last for 2 years. As for what happens after 3 years, we might come back to LegCo to apply for resources. We'll see how things will go first. For the establishment proposal of a chief labor officer, well, this panel has spent quite a lot of time discussing it. The members say that what we need to do, what we ought to do, for example, expediting the processing, is also to align with the NSL objectives, and hope that the bona fide trade unions can be established and also protect their rights to form unions. This we all agree. So whether we must create a new position or whether another CLO in charge of the SMW, the another way to add more job duties to the other CLO, the members' views was quite diverse on this. Well, it's hard for me to judge the support. Let's do it a show of hands. That whether we agree to refer to this chief labor officer supernumerary post proposal to in charge of the registry of trade unions. So for those who agree to refer to the finance committee, please put up your hand. That's clear indication. One support for the against. Abstentions. One for the rest of extensions. Let's follow our procedures. Let's refer to the finance committee to scrutinize this staffing proposal. I hope that the government can provide more details to the members to why you must create a new position, a directorate post and supernumerary post. Is it absolutely necessary? While the original office holder used to wear two hats for the SMW and the trade union registrar. For the SMW, how can it be more proactive? If it's only required to handle one thing, there'll be too little work. Hope that the secretary can lobby for the member support at the finance committee. Fifth item, the major findings of the 2021 annual earnings and hours survey. And for the electrical brief, please refer to CB bracket 2215/2022 bracket 06. And on March 21st, the government announced the 2021 report on the annual earnings and hours survey. The report and the press release, CB bracket 2215/202205, has been issued to members earlier. Can we invite from the Census and Statistics Department Assistant Commissioner Ms. Wendy Yu to walk us through the major findings? And Ms. Anne Chang, Senior Statistician Labor from the CSD, and Mr. Eric Lee, Principal Economist of the Office of the Government Economist, as well as Mr. Raymond Ho, Deputy Commissioner for Labor. We're now waiting for the LWB colleagues to get back online. Are we ready? I know you have prepared a PPT presentation. I hope that you can reserve more time for questionings. I hope that you can be succinct and under 10 minutes. Let's start. For the for methodology, we covered all sectors regardless of the size, and the survey period is from May to June of 2020. We've interviewed over 10,000 business undertakings and 60,000 workers. For the monthly wage, we followed the government's definition of the statutory minimum wage. the pay, we count rest days as well as meal breaks. And let's look at the wage distribution compared to 2021. The median wage has risen by 1.6% to $18,700. Compared to the is higher than the CPI inflation. That in 2021 there's a real growth compared to last year. So the 10th percentile recorded a 1.8% increase.
If we look at the age, gender, educational attainments, etc., for male employees is 21,500, and for female staff is a bit less. As for the age groups, it's 34 to 45 is to 21,600, year-on-year increase 1.1%. Is the highest among all groups. And for the lowest group is age 15 to 24, 13,700. As for educational attainments, well, for those with post-secondary education is the highest, is 28,500. And the lowest is a primary education or under 12,600. And if we look at the occupational groups, we can see a year-on-year increase is 1.1% to 2.1% for managers, administrators, professionals. The increase is 2.1%. It's followed by non-skilled workers, increase by 1.9%. Thirdly, it's craftsmen and plant and machines operators and assemblers, etc., increased by 1.5%. As for the occupational groups in 2021, the median has recorded an increase. It's from 0.5% to 2.4%, while the one with the highest increase is finance and insurance, 2.4%, but for retail, is dropped by 1.7%. Now let us look at the hourly wage. Well, we have taken reference from the SMW ordinance. We have looked at the definition of wage and working hours. When it's compared with 2021, for the median hourly wage is $75.7, an increase of 1.8%. And when it's compared with the consumer price index, is increased by 0.8%, and also there's a year-on-year increase. But for the lower percentile, the increase is smaller. Well, let us look at the distribution of hourly wage. Well, for those with SMW, 37.5%, we have 14,300 people working in this band. When it's compared with 2020, 2,200 people less, a drop of 0.1%. Under $38. And for those under $45, we have seen decreases. As for the distribution of hourly wage, we can look at the genders. The median, that is the red dot, for male employees is 84.4, for females is 66.9. Of the median for males is less than the medians for males by 21%. That's the same in the last year. And when we look at the age groups, it's more or less the same as last year. For those of age between 35 to 44 is $83.3, and then it's followed by 45, age 45 to age 54, $77.1. And let us look at the educational attainments. Well, for employees of different educational attainments, so, the disparity of wages is very huge. It's between $51.3 to $116.7. For those with post-secondary education, their hourly wage is much higher than all the other groups. This is more or less the same as the situation in the last year. And if we look at the occupational groups for non-skilled workers, is lowest, $50.8. And you can look at it from the left to the right. The left is the lowest, is non-skilled workers, and is followed by service and sales personnel. The highest is managers, administrators, professionals, and paraprofessionals. $116.2 is the more or less the same as that of last year. And if we look at the occupational groups, these are the 4 highest groups, and the order is the same as that of last year. The highest is education and public administration, $133, followed by finance and insurance. The median is $112.5, and followed by gas, supply, electricity, sewage management, waste management, and the last one is construction. As for the lowest hourly wage industry, is the same as those in 2020. The lowest is property management, security, and cleaners, and followed by miscellaneous activities, followed by food and beverage services. As for retail, it's 53.7. As for working hours, we follow the definition in the SMW ordinance. They include contractual and agreed working hours. And that would include meal breaks if they are regarded as working hours according to the employment contract agreement with the employer. Now let us look at the distribution when it's compared with 2020. In 2021, the 25th percentile and median have seen increases, that is 1.4% and 0.8%. But for the 75th percentile, when it's compared with the previous year, no change, 48 hours. Well, other than looking at the earnings and hours, we also have conducted the general household survey. We have also asked the interviewees about working hours. There's a like difference here, but if you look at the trend, in April to June 2021, the median working hours is 43 hours. It's higher than 40 hours in the last year, and that's a difference of 7.5%. As for the method of calculation and the coverage of employees, they are different. So for the general household surveys figures, they cannot be compared directly with the results of the AEHS. And let us look at the low pay occupations. For retail, the working hours every week, there has been a drop of 0.5%. As for food and beverage, cleaner, security, property management, they have increased by 0.4 and 0.5%. As for miscellaneous activities, no change as compared with the previous year, 48 hours. Now let us look at the median working hours of lower paid employees. For those with less than $41.5, it's 48 hours. This, when they are compared with the previous years, there have been no changes. This is my presentation. Thank you. For members who are interested in asking questions, please raise your hands. Or not many members are raising their hands, so I am not imposing a lot of restrictions on you. First, Vice Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. And I would like to thank the government official for her clear explanation. I have two questions. First, for this AEHS is related to the adjustment of the SMW rate. The figures are very clear. For the median monthly or median hourly wage is $75.5, and now we have 14,000 people who are getting the SMW. I have looked at the information 10 years ago. The SMW was implemented 10 years ago, and the first level was 28. First rate was $28. When it's compared with the AEHS that year, at that time, $28 was at about the 10th percentile. So 280,000 people were protected by the SMWs, but for the present rates now it's only protecting less than 1% of the workers. So for 10 years ago, if we make the same calculation, it should be at, well, if we make the same calculations, the rates at present should be $44.7. So shouldn't you look at it again? And secondly, you mentioned one of the occupations that is miscellaneous. This is for workers working for elderly homes. Well, they have a very low pay. I thought I have read it wrongly, but it's actually true. The government has been saying that it has been raising the wages for elderly home workers, but I don't think that is a fact. And now there are about 20,000 people working for elderly homes. That is at the 5th percentile. The wage is $39.1. And the median wage is $53.1. The government claims that it has increased the wages for elderly home workers. So these figures are not consistent with the government saying. So is there something wrong with this survey, or some elderly home workers are not classified under your rights occupational groups? Or in the contracts, the wage is high, but actually they are paid less. So for elderly home workers, I think they are receiving a really low wage. We have to face this squarely. Otherwise, in the long run, you won't be able to hire people to work in elderly homes. And if unfortunately there is another wave of epidemic, then we will revisit the nightmare in February and March. This problem cannot be solved. I hope the government can give me an answer. Census and Statistics Department. As for elderly homes, these include bought places, homes, and private homes. We have not moved it to other groups. As for wages, it include guaranteed bonuses, etc. As for payments in kind or meal allowances, they are not included in the definition of wage. And if the bonuses or allowances are not guaranteed, they are not included in the wage as well. Mr. Leung Chun-sing, do you want the government to supplement? No, the government has given me an explanation, but I hope that the administration will follow up on these survey data. Well, the government claims that the wages for elderly homes workers have improved, but is that really the case? I hope the government will continue to follow up. Mr. Chow Tong. I would like to thank the Census and Statistics Department for its hard work. The Labor and Welfare Bureau hasn't sent any representatives today. Well, I'm very concerned about SMW. And at the last review, I think a lot of people were not happy because it was frozen. The freight was frozen. Now, only 14,300 people are getting $37.5. That is the SMW. So why do you have to freeze it? Actually, I want to tell the secretary. Maybe the staff from Census and Statistics Department cannot answer my questions. Well, we can only add $1, $38.5, then it will only affect 30,000 people. But it will have a ripple effect. Now we are in a bad economic situation, and a ripple effect would not happen. Now, employers would like to keep their employees. So if the pay for the lower ranked workers has increased, then they would have to increase the wage for their upper level employees.
Well, in the recession, there will be no ripple effect. Last year, the government decided to freeze the minimum wage. This was a huge disappointment. Well, you're just talking about over 10,000 people. Even if you raise it to $40, you can only benefit an extra 70,000 people. So that's my first observation. I hope that the government can consider a good adjustment mechanism so that the workers at the bottom can enjoy minimum wage increase. Well, you can see the wages are raising at all sectors, but not those at the very bottom. Why are we not giving them a raise? We see that we are working longer. How the government can consider, since we have the most working hours in the world, whether we need to regulate working hours. Well, in 2021, that our median working hours compared to 2021, there's an increase. Well, at the median workers had increased by about 0.4 hours. In 2019, the median working hours was 44.3 hours. Back in 2019, well, due to the pandemic or due to the economic conditions, the weekly working hours median had dropped by 1.5 hours to 42.8. In 2021, it's risen to 43.2. Compared to 2021 to 2019, you see there was still a drop of 1.2 hours. Mr. Chow, do you wish to follow up? Nothing for me. Mr. Kwok Wai Kang. Thank you, Chairman. The Hong Kong's wealth disparity is growing. To address this, besides government intervention, we need to raise the basic income for the bottom families. While freezing the minimum pay is a huge mistake, slight adjustment of the minimum wage would only widen the poverty gap. Well, back in 2011, the $28 per hour was too low. But the CSD figures, the lowest 5 percentile is at least $41, and yet the minimum wage was just $38, benefiting just about 11,000 people. For future minimum wage adjustments, besides haggling with the employers, I hope that the government comes up with some concepts or philosophies of reducing the wealth gap. The minimum wage is not just about the workers proposing its offer. Can the minimum wage plays a bigger role in wealth distribution to help the poor families? I hope the government can respond. After the pandemic, the tourism sector has been frozen. Can the CST explain that in your survey that there's not much changes to the tourist agents from $15,200, and on your survey this year is $15,000. I suppose I wonder why are they still employed? I don't see a sharp drop in income. Did something happen during data gathering, or you had made some adjustments or whatever reason? Well, for a frozen industry, why are they still reporting income? For the tourism sector, since year 2020, they have been doing poorly. Back in 2020 and 2019, the number of people and the pay dropped drastically. Because in 2021, there was a slight drop from 2020. I suppose that things had stabilized. Compared to 2019, in the before the pandemic, the labor force power and the pay dropped significantly. Why is not reflected in the figures? Well, there had been a sharp drop in 2020. Compared to 2020 to 2021, I suppose it dropped to a very low level. The drop has been stabilized, and when you look at the pre-pandemic levels, the drop was much more tangible, understood. And now my turn. I won't talk about the labor sector's aspiration, as the administration teams come from the government's economists and the CSG department. I have a statistical question. There was a recent incident that caused me to lose confidence toward the LSD, especially where labor statistics is concerned. That for the job support scheme, temporary employment relief, there are over 400,000 applications. That means that over 1/10 of the workers apply for the TUA. I suppose there will be roughly the same number of approved applicants. Well, despite so many hurdles, there was a 10% application rate. However, the government always claims that only 4 to 5% of the workers applied. I had said that this kind of figures could not reflect reality. May I ask the CSD, the FTU asks the same question every year. On the working hours survey, why you only ask the employers but not the workers? Why you only compile data on the contracted hours Well, the contracted hours always stayed from 9 to 6. Well, the boss did not ask them to work overtime. They worked overtime voluntarily. According to you, that's the working hours on the contract or the overtime directed by the employer. So when the overtime is directed by the employer, they usually paid OT. For the no pay OT, they wouldn't be counted. Let's say the boss usually give the workers a lot of work just before they close for the day. That's not captured by the survey. When can the government survey the workers, or it can ask both the employer on the working hours or the working hours reported by the workers themselves? Can we do that? Second question. Even though there was a slight uptick in the wages, about 1 or 2%, at this moment, we felt it wasn't too bad. Well, the pandemic struck us hard. However, we're talking about the first half of last year, which wasn't doing too bad. Last year, we recorded 6.5% economic growth. Why are wage increase have fallen way behind economic growth? We'll talk about 2021 here, and couldn't make up to the drop in 2019 and 2020. May I ask if the economists can explain why our wages growth are so low? Let me first answer the first part of the question before handing over to my colleague. On the number of workers and as well as the applicants of the temporary employment relief, well, they have received the 470,000 applicants. As for how many of them will be approved, that is better answered by the department responsible. They are currently handling the applications. For the unemployment statistics from the CSD, we are following the global definitions. Well, if there's no income, there's no work limit. Well, if they're ready for work anytime, for the housewives taking care of the kids, that's won't follow the definition. And whether they have been looking for work. For the TU, Assistant Commissioner, I know about the government's definition of the unemployment rate. I'm not asking about the unemployment rate. Well, the TURs had a narrower definition than the government. It's not my question. Talk about the working hours. Why could not survey the working hours as reported by the employees? In the general household survey, well, this is a rolling survey conducted monthly. We visit them door to door to ask the working family member for the past 7 days how many hours they had worked. This is the actual working hours. In other words, the time spent in offices where this is requested by the employer or they volunteer to work them, that's the working hours they reported. I wonder, can you do a comparison by comparing the AEHS and the household survey findings? And slide 19, there is the median working hours from the general household survey. We can consider your proposal to see in the future that we can do some further drill downs. And as the economist, what's his take on the discrepancy between economic growth and wage growth? Well, the wage rate is subjected to labor supply and demand. It's hard to equate with the prevailing economic growth rate. The CSD data informs us that in 2021, the May and June reported a growth into wages and exceeded the inflation. On the other hand, the economy was in recovery in the mid-2021. We need to take note, though, the recovery was from a severe depression back from 2020. In terms of the total number of workers, there had been a rebound considering the massive drop of a decrease in the workforce was unprecedented. Therefore, the labor supply or the demand would rise along with the economy.
If the economy continues to pick up, then of course the wage increase rates can be faster. So the economy would have to recover. And that is a very important factor. In particular, in this year, we had the fifth wave, so the economy was further hit. Now, I hope the government economist can give more advices to the government. That is, for the employees' wage levels, they should be on par with the economic recovery. If there is an economic recession, the wages drop rapidly. However, if the economy picks up, the wage level doesn't go back up so fast. I understand that there are a lot of factors affecting wage levels. However, if in the long run, the wage level lags behind the GDP increase, then our wealth gap will be wider and wider, and only a small group of people with assets that can enjoy the benefits of thriving economy. So I hope that you can give more concrete advices to the government. Okay, members, do you still want to say anything concerning this item? If not, then let's move on to any other business. Members, any other business? If not, we will adjourn today's Manpower panel meeting. I would like to thank the members and government officials for attending the meeting. Thank you. Bye-bye.